The morning her card was declined, no one in that coffee shop knew who she was. And that was exactly how Charlotte Reeves liked it. It was just after 7. Cold air still clung to the sidewalks, and the city was half awake in that quiet way before the real rush began. She stood in line like everyone else, hands folded around her phone, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. No assistant, no driver hovering close, just a woman waiting for coffee. Charlotte had built her company from a folding table and a borrowed laptop. Now she ran an empire, glass towers, boardrooms, headlines with her name in bold. People said she was worth more than most small towns. But on Monday mornings she came here alone. It was the only place where no one needed anything from her. When she reached the counter, she ordered the same thing she always did. Oat milk latte, extra shot. She pulled out her sleek black card without looking at it. She never looked at it. The machine beeped. The young barista frowned and tried again. Another beep. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "It's declined." The word seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. Declined. Behind her, someone shifted impatiently. Another person sighed. Charlotte felt heat rise in her face. It wasn't the $5. It wasn't even the inconvenience. It was the feeling of not being in control. "That can't be right," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Run it again." He did. Declined. For a moment, she felt strangely exposed. Not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, just as a woman who couldn't pay for her coffee. She reached for another card. It was connected to the same account. She knew it was. Her hands, usually so sure, moved slower now. That was when a hand reached past her, weathered, scarred at the knuckles, holding a slightly wrinkled $10 bill. "I got it," a man said quietly. Charlotte turned. He wasn't dressed in a suit. No polished shoes. No watch worth more than a car. Just a Navy security uniform and eyes that looked steady. Calm. He didn't smile like he was rescuing her. He didn't look impressed. He simply placed the bill on the counter as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "That's not necessary," Charlotte said automatically. He shrugged gently. "Happens to everybody." "Not to me," she almost said, but something stopped her, because for the first time in years it had. Their drinks were called. They reached for them at the same time. His name tag caught her eye. Ethan Cole. He nodded once like this was no big thing at all and stepped toward the door. Charlotte stood there for a second longer than she needed to, holding her coffee and watching him walk out into the morning. She didn't know that he worked in her building. She didn't know that he had once designed systems more complex than anything her company used. She didn't know that he had buried half his heart 3 years ago and rebuilt the other half around a 9-year-old boy. All she knew was that a stranger had stepped in when she felt small, and somehow that mattered more than it should have. Outside, the city carried on. Inside, something quiet had shifted. She just didn't know it yet. Charlotte didn't forget him. That surprised her more than anything. She had sat in boardrooms with senators and investors. She had negotiated deals worth millions without blinking. Yet all morning, while directors discussed growth targets and market expansion, her mind drifted back to a wrinkled $10 bill. To the way he'd said, "happens to everybody," as if embarrassment were something ordinary, as if pride didn't matter. After the meeting, she did something she rarely did. She asked a question. "Who's on security for West Tower mornings?" she said to her assistant. A few minutes later, the answer came back. Ethan Cole, 8 months with the company, night shift mostly, switched to mornings recently. Charlotte nodded once. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Later that afternoon, she asked HR to pull a file. She didn't give a reason. She didn't need to. Being CEO came with quiet privileges. The resume was impressive. MIT, dual degrees, patents, defense contracts. And then nothing. 3 years blank. Rejected. Flagged for unexplained employment gap. Charlotte leaned back in her chair and stared at the screen. A man capable of building systems that protected governments was standing at her lobby desk checking visitor badges. She kept reading. The background report filled in what the resume hadn't. A car accident, rain. A truck that drifted across a yellow line. Wife gone, daughter gone. A son who survived. Ethan had left his job the next day. For 3 years he had stayed home. Therapy appointments, nightmares, school pickups, grief that came in waves without warning. When the savings ran out, he'd applied for work. Her company had turned him away. Charlotte closed the file slowly. For a long time she just sat there. All her talk about innovation, about inclusion. about seeing potential where others didn't, and she had missed him. The man who bought her coffee without hesitation was the same man her system had dismissed with a checkbox. That evening, instead of using the private elevator, Charlotte walked through the lobby. Ethan stood behind the security desk, shoulders relaxed, greeting employees as they passed. No bitterness in his face, no sign of complaint. Just steady. When he saw her, he nodded politely. Ms. Reeves. Charlotte, she corrected gently. He inclined his head. Charlotte. She hesitated. She wasn't used to hesitating. I read your file, she said quietly. His expression didn't change, not surprised, not defensive. I figured you might. I'm sorry, she said. For the rejection? For not seeing you. Something flickered in his eyes then. Not anger. Something softer. Tired, maybe. It's all right, he said. It worked out. She almost asked how working nights as security could possibly count as working out. But she already knew. It let him be home in the afternoons. It let him pick up his son from school. It let him be a father first. Charlotte stood there, feeling something uncomfortable but honest settle in her chest. I'd like to offer you another position, she said. He studied her carefully. With normal hours? With your son's hours, she replied. For the first time, he looked uncertain, and in that uncertainty, Charlotte realized something important. This wasn't about a job. It was about trust. And trust, she knew, wasn't earned in boardrooms. It was earned in quiet moments over $5 coffee. Ethan didn't answer right away. He rested his hands on the edge of the security desk. The same hands that had once built systems far more complicated than anything in this building. For a moment, he looked past Charlotte, out through the glass doors to the street. My son gets out at 3, he said finally, every day. I know, Charlotte replied softly. He glanced at her then, measuring something in her face. And Tuesdays and Thursdays he has therapy at 4. Some weeks are good, some weeks aren't. He paused. If I take this job, and one day he needs me in the middle of something important, I walk out. No questions. Charlotte nodded without hesitation. Then you walk out. He studied her again like he was waiting for the catch. There isn't one, she added. I don't want you choosing between being a father and being an employee. That's not how corporate works, he said quietly. It is now. There was no pride in her voice, just certainty. Ethan looked down at the polished floor tiles. For 3 years, he had rebuilt his life around one promise, that Noah would never feel alone. He had learned to live smaller, to expect less, to protect what remained. This offer wasn't small. It was a door back into a world he had closed. I need to talk to him, he said. Of course. That evening, in a small apartment across the river, Ethan sat at the kitchen table while Noah picked at a slice of pizza. There's a new job, Ethan said carefully. Same building, different work. Better work? Noah asked. Yeah. More money? Yeah. Noah was quiet for a moment. Would you still pick me up? Every day. Would you still come if I called? Every time. Noah nodded slowly. Then you should try. Why? Because you're really good at that computer stuff, Noah said with a small shrug. And when you talk about it, you don't look sad. That landed deeper than Ethan expected. Later that night, standing on the fire escape while the city hummed below, he thought about the woman in the coffee shop. The way she had said, with your son's hours. She hadn't looked powerful in that moment. She had looked sincere. The next morning, Ethan stepped into Charlotte's office. Not as a security guard, but as a man deciding whether to open his life again. I'll take it, he said simply. Charlotte didn't smile the way CEOs smile when they close a deal. She smiled the way someone smiles when something fragile survives. Welcome back, she said. And for the first time in 3 years, Ethan felt something shift. Not relief, not exactly hope, something steadier, like the first brick laid in a new foundation. The first week felt strange. Ethan traded his Navy security uniform for a quiet corner office with 2 monitors and a chair that cost more than his old car. The work came back to him quickly. Code had a rhythm. Systems had logic. Problems had solutions. It felt familiar. What didn't feel familiar was leaving at 3. The first afternoon he shut down his screen, a few heads turned. Most people in the engineering wing stayed long past dinner. Late nights were worn like medals here. Ethan slipped on his jacket and walked out without apology. By 3:18 he was standing outside Noah's school leaning against the same oak tree as always. When the doors opened and Noah ran toward him, backpack bouncing, nothing else seemed to matter. How was work? Noah asked. Busy, Ethan said. Good. You look lighter. Do I? Yeah, like when you used to build stuff before. Ethan smiled at that. Back at Tech Vision, Charlotte watched the changes quietly. Not in reports or performance reviews, in smaller ways. Engineers started stopping by Ethan's office. At first with skepticism, then with questions, then with respect. He didn't stay late to impress anyone. He didn't rush to speak in meetings. But when he did speak, people listened. One afternoon, he found a vulnerability in their authentication system that 3 senior analysts had missed for months. He fixed it before lunch. Marcus, the CTO, stood in Ethan's doorway afterward. "You've been here 10 days, Marcus said, and you've already cleaned up half my backlog." Ethan shrugged gently. Fresh eyes. Marcus studied him. "You don't seem interested in climbing." "I've already climbed," Ethan said. "I'm more interested in balance." That word lingered. Balance. It wasn't something Tech Vision had been built on. Charlotte noticed something else, too. Ethan never once mentioned the flexibility she'd offered. Never used it as leverage. Never acted grateful in a way that made it feel uneven. He simply did his work, and then he went home. One evening, as she passed through the lobby, she saw him kneeling beside Noah near the security desk. The boy was showing him something on a tablet, animated dragons battling in bright colors. Ethan listened like it was the most important presentation in the building. Charlotte stood there longer than she meant to. She had built a company. He was building a life, and somehow, watching him do both without losing either felt like the quiet correction she hadn't known she needed. Later that night, alone in her apartment overlooking the river, Charlotte poured herself a glass of wine and stared at the skyline. She had everything the world said mattered, but for the first time in years she found herself wanting something simpler. A dinner table with 3 chairs, laughter that wasn't strategic, a life that didn't require armor. The next morning she stopped by Ethan's office. "Coffee?" she asked lightly. "Yes." He looked up, surprised but warm. "You paying?" She smiled, this time, and when they walked down to the street together side by side, it didn't feel like CEO and employee. It felt like something gentler, like 2 people learning how to let the light back in. They didn't mean for it to become a habit, but it did. Coffee on Fridays. A quiet walk back to the tower. Conversations that started about server upgrades and drifted into childhood memories, favorite books, small regrets. Charlotte found herself talking more than she had in years, not about quarterly earnings, about her father. "He built his company from nothing," she said one morning, staring into her cup. "Everyone admired him. I did too. But he missed everything that mattered. Birthdays, school plays, even dinners." Ethan listened without interrupting. "I told myself I'd never be that person," she continued. "And then one day I realized I was eating most of my meals alone." Ethan didn't offer advice. He didn't fill the silence. He just said, "It's not too late." That was the thing about him. He didn't try to fix people. He believed they could fix themselves. One afternoon, Noah showed up at the office unexpectedly. School had closed early because of a burst water pipe, and Ethan had no time to make other arrangements. Charlotte insisted he bring Noah upstairs. The boy stepped into her office carefully, eyes wide at the view from 47 floors up. "Wow," he whispered. "It's like being in the sky." Charlotte crouched down to his level. "It's nicer down on the ground," she said. "Less lonely." Noah looked at her like he understood more than she expected. They spent an hour together while Ethan finished his work. Noah read quietly on the couch. Charlotte asked him about dragons. She listened closely, asking questions like it mattered. When Ethan finally closed his laptop, he found them both laughing over some complicated dragon politics. "You're wrong," Noah was saying. "Ice dragons are stronger than fire dragons if you use strategy." Charlotte shook her head. "Only if you're patient." Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, watching. It was a simple scene, but it felt full. On the drive home that night, Noah was quiet. "Do you like her?" Ethan asked gently. "Yeah," Noah said. "She doesn't pretend." That settled somewhere deep in Ethan's chest. Neither of them said the word love, not yet, but something had begun to grow. Not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily, like roots finding water. A week later, Charlotte found herself standing at the window of her apartment, phone in hand. She hadn't called anyone at night in years unless it was about business. She hesitated. Then she dialed. Ethan answered on the second ring. "Everything okay?" "Yes," she said softly. "I just wanted to talk." And in that quiet space between his small apartment in Brooklyn and her high-rise overlooking the river, something real began to take shape. Not a headline, not a fairy tale, just two people learning that second chances don't arrive with fireworks. They arrive quietly, sometimes holding a cup of coffee. The calls became their favorite part of the day. Not long ones, not dramatic ones, just steady. Some nights they talked about work, other nights about nothing at all. The way Noah refused to eat green vegetables, the way Charlotte had once tried to bake and nearly set off her smoke alarm. Small things, human things. One night after Noah had gone to bed, Ethan sat on the fire escape with his phone pressed to his ear. "I forgot what this felt like," he said quietly. "What?" Charlotte asked. "Looking forward to tomorrow." There was a long pause on the other end. "I've been successful for years," Charlotte said softly. "But I haven't felt content. Not like this." Neither of them rushed what was forming. They both knew how fragile happiness could be. Still, it grew. The first time Ethan reached for her hand in public, it wasn't planned. They were walking back from lunch. The sidewalk was crowded. She stepped off the curb without looking. He caught her hand automatically. Neither of them let go. People noticed. Marcus noticed first. He leaned against Ethan's office door one afternoon and said, "You look different." "Different how?" "Less like someone bracing for impact." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe I stopped bracing." Charlotte noticed something else. Ethan never once blurred his boundaries. He still left at 3. He still prioritized Noah's therapy. He never let his relationship with her become a shortcut. If anything, he worked harder, not to impress her, but because he cared about what they were building. One evening, Charlotte came to Brooklyn for dinner. It was nothing fancy. Pasta. Garlic bread that Noah insisted on making himself. A small kitchen table with barely enough room for 3 plates. Charlotte rolled up her sleeves and washed dishes afterward. "I don't think I've done this since college," she admitted. Noah watched her carefully. "You don't act like a boss," he said. Charlotte laughed softly. "That's because I'm not your boss." "What are you then?" She hesitated. Ethan looked at her, giving her space. "I'm someone who cares about you," she said finally. Noah nodded slowly. "That's good," he replied, "because we care about you too." That night after Noah fell asleep, Ethan walked Charlotte to her car. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. "I don't want to rush this," Ethan said gently. "Noah has already lost so much." "I know," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." They stood there longer than necessary. Then Charlotte leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate. It was steady, like something decided. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead against his. "I don't regret the declined card," she whispered. "Neither do I." And for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone walking into the night. The proposal didn't happen in a restaurant. There were no candles, no violin, no audience. It happened on a Tuesday night in Ethan's small Brooklyn kitchen with dishes drying in the rack and Noah doing homework at the table. Charlotte had stayed late at the office. A system update had gone longer than expected, and by the time she arrived, she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with work. Noah noticed first. "You okay?" he asked her gently. She smiled. "Just a long day." Ethan watched her for a moment. He had learned the difference between exhaustion and loneliness. This wasn't exhaustion. After Noah went to bed, they stood by the sink together. "I used to think strength meant doing everything alone," Charlotte said quietly. "I thought if I needed someone, it meant I wasn't capable." Ethan dried a plate slowly. "Needing someone doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." She looked at him then, really looked at him. The way she had that first morning in the coffee shop when pride had cracked for just a second. "I don't want to do this alone anymore," she said. Ethan set the plate down. "I don't want you to," he replied. He didn't kneel. He didn't have a speech prepared. He simply took her hands. "I don't know what the future looks like," he said, "but I know I want you in it. With me, with Noah. Not visiting, not temporary, permanent." Charlotte's breath caught. "Yes," she whispered before he even asked. Noah found out the next morning over pancakes. "Does this mean you're staying?" he asked Charlotte. "If you'll have me." Noah considered this carefully. "Okay," he said finally, "but you have to learn more about dragons." She laughed, and the sound filled the small kitchen like sunlight. The wedding was simple. A rooftop overlooking the same skyline where she had once stood alone. Marcus came. A few close friends. Noah held the rings with hands that shook only a little. When Ethan kissed Charlotte, it wasn't the start of something new. It was the continuation of something brave. A year later, on a bright March morning, the 3 of them stood outside that same coffee shop. "This is where it happened?" Noah asked. "This is where everything changed," Charlotte said softly. They went inside. This time, when the card machine beeped, it approved without hesitation. Ethan paid anyway. "Just in case," he said. "Just in case what?" Charlotte smiled. "In case we ever forget what $5 can do." They stepped back out into the morning. Noah ran ahead toward school. Charlotte slipped her hand into Ethan's. The city moved around them, busy and loud and unaware. But they walked slowly, because sometimes the most important moments don't look important at all. Sometimes they look like a declined card, a quiet offer, a second chance. And if this story stayed with you, stay close. There's always another light waiting beyond the porch.